I write quite a lot of flash fiction, and I think the secret to writing it, at least in my opinion, is an element that I can't even really explain, but it's something that all the best flash fiction stories have, and it's something that you can use too if you're writing flash fiction or really for any kind of writing. It's how those stories try to put into words things that really can't be put into words, and it's how they shine a light on all those moments from our lives that there isn't really a name for. Those moments, for me, are the very best source of story. I love to take those tiny instants and expand them and unpack all the details from them that make them what they are, universal but indefinable, and turn them into 500 or 1,000 words that will hopefully stay with a reader long after they finish the story. That's what I'm always striving to do with everything that I write. Whether I'm successful or not, who knows, but I want to talk to you about how I try. So if you want to write that kind of story too, I can tell you some of the things that have worked for me, so let's get started. If you told me I was only allowed to give one piece of advice about writing flash fiction, it would be this: ignore narrative. But then I'd have to explain myself a bit further. I'd probably edit myself just slightly and say, ignore narrative, at least at first. Though it seems like the obvious place to start, approaching flash fiction aiming to tell a plot-driven story has always felt a bit wrong to me. There's too much to organise and unpack and structure and not enough time or space to do it in. It's almost stressful. Beginning a story with all of those points and parts and events already in your hands is really restrictive. As well as a plot, you might have a feeling that you want to give to your reader or a message that you want to get across with your story, but that can get covered over and obscured by too much focus on events and actions. Instead, what I prefer to do is start a story with nothing in mind other than the tiniest moment. Maybe the vaguest idea of something I want to happen in the plot, but most of the time, not even that. Then I let that moment expand and fill out the rest of the story so that it has a chance to reveal that feeling that I want to give to the reader or that message that I want to get across. I prioritise how I want things to feel, and then I let that drive the story forward, in the same way that a plot usually does with longer work like a novel. Then, as I'm writing, if a little bit of plot does come to me, I can make some room for that, rather than filling up the whole story with action and events and then having to squeeze in something memorable that the reader will take away with them. But the big question is, where do I get these moments that lead the stories? Where do they come from? The source of these moments I keep talking about will be familiar to you, but you just may never have thought about it or noticed it. It's still almost impossible to explain what I mean, but as I like to do generally on this channel, I can give you some examples. What I'm hoping to capture as I start a flash fiction story is something that's almost like an atmosphere, but that word doesn't really cover it. It's how the light looks at a particular time on a meaningful day. It's hearing people talking in another room while you're alone reading. It's that feeling of being watched, even though there's nobody else around. It's the last time you'll ever be in a place. An empty house with missing furniture and a set of keys on the side counter that are going to go on and have a whole different life without you. That kind of thing. Those kind of moments. Those examples go some of the way to explaining what I really mean, but even they still don't get all the way there. However, I came across a pixel art image the other day, which is a great example of this nameless concept. It depicts this stalled moment in time that's the perfect representation of what I'm talking about. Here it is. The snow falling, the flickering of a TV in the window, and the headlights on the trees in the darkness. Even though you can't see anyone there, it still has a presence to it. I suppose that's a good word for it, really. A presence. A moment that contains something more, that's different and significant. Something that's ordinary but not ordinary at the same time. That's the sort of thing that's worth writing about, for me anyway. Hopefully you see what I mean and why I'm having such a hard time describing it. Instead of, wouldn't it be cool if this happened in my story? I think you give your writing far more weight by talking about these kinds of moments. Ones that make you more aware of time passing and where you've come from, where you are now, and where you'll go on to be in the future. While I take a lot of responsibility, I think to some extent not being able to define this kind of thing is also a failing of the English language. There are other languages that have some great words and definitions for this kind of moment. For example, in German there's a word for the feeling that time is running out. The Japanese have a word for how the sunlight filters through the leaves of trees. And in Portuguese, you only need one word to describe how you long for someone or something that you loved that is lost. And by all means, if you happen to know any other words that have these strange and very particular meanings in other languages, let me know in the comments. But that's what I mean when I say ignore narrative, at least at first. Big human reactions and emotions don't have to come from car chases and battles to the death. They can be found in these tiny moments like the seconds just before and after a phone call. You just need to slow everything down and really look at them. I mentioned examples. Here's one from a piece of flash fiction that I wrote pretty recently. I already mentioned this story in a video about building depth in your writing, which I'll link up here and at the end of the video. When I started this story, I knew I wanted it to feel like an ordinary night at first before it changed altogether, and I knew I wanted to pinpoint the exact moment when everything changed. That was my aim. That was the moment that was leading the story for me. I had no idea what I wanted to happen in terms of plot. I was just purely prioritising making the story feel a certain way. At the opening of this story, a teenager, Jed, is helping out at his mother's bar while there's an after-hours poker game going on in one of the back rooms. He could hear an engine out in the night somewhere, outside of town. He might have liked a moment for a cigarette and to lean against one of the cars like he owned it, but he knew better. Instead, he settled for flicking his imaginary cigarette into the gutter and then went back inside, into the hot air. I talked about the night outside and the air of the bar. I was trying to ground the character in his location and create some of that presence that I was talking about before. The shadow of something else waiting out there besides just a normal night. A little while later, the phone in the storeroom rings, and Jed answers it. It's a family friend who's also the police. I knew I wanted this phone call to be the turning point, the pinpoint moment. "McKay's," he said. He slumped down onto some piled up hard lemonade crates. No one was buying it. People said they didn't drink cocktails.
"Jed, it's Davey."
"If it's about the illegal gambling that's going on in our back room right now, I can promise you no one's betting enough to make it worth you crossing the street." Nothing. Something was off about Davey. He wasn't playing along. He always did.
"No, it's not that. Look, is Frances there?"
"We're closed. Everyone left a while ago. Why?"
"Just need to speak to her is all. If she's not there, that's fine.
What's happened, Davey?"
I ain't built for this,"
Davey said. Jesus Christ, what? Jed clutched the phone, standing in a strip of light from the other room, among the boxes and barrels that were yet to be drunk. As you can probably tell, Jed's about to get some pretty bad news about a friend of his, and that's the moment that led this whole story for me. As Jed stands there in the darkness of the storeroom, this is the second that I wanted to pinpoint. That's why I wrote in that literal strip of light, freezing him in place in his location, stopping time for a moment before it carries on and the night feels totally different. On the other side of that moment, things have altered somehow. They're not the same as they were before, so I tried my best to show that. His mother was still leaning against the door, how she'd been before. It was like nothing had changed, but everything had. The shape of the night outside was different. The sound of the engine he'd heard when he was smoking his fake cigarette, that was different. The stakes of the game going on 10 feet away around a folding card table, different. "Mum." She turned to him. I kept Jed's mother standing in the same spot that I left her in, and I kept the poker game going on too because nobody else knows yet that everything's changed. Jed is carrying that change with him, or that moment that I based the entire story around, and so it's up to him now to pass on that message to everybody else and let them know how the night has really changed. If you want to read that story in full, it's less than 1,000 words. It's called Red Light and Heat and Rush, and it's up on my website, the link to which is down below in the description. I drafted this video a good few times. I do with all of my videos, but in this one I really don't know if I've managed to get across what I wanted to get across, so by all means let me know. But if you're looking to write flash fiction or pretty much any kind of writing where you want to impact your reader and make them think or make them shudder, then this is how I try to do that. It's not always possible or appropriate to write plot twists that will shock a reader or move them, but I think speaking to readers in this language of indefinable but universal moments is my favourite way to try and make them leave my stories feeling different to how they found them. And that's really what I love the most about flash fiction. So if you're thinking about writing flash fiction, I'd encourage you to try and start with a moment like that, rather than just trying to figure out what you want to happen in the story. That kind of thing, I think, is where the best flash fiction comes from. If you want to know more about my flash fiction or my course, which is all about flash fiction, then head to my website. And if you want to be part of my community, feel free to join our free Discord server. The links to both are in the description down below. As always, thank you so much for watching. Happy writing.